Here I have a something or other VW. This part looks familiar. The old 1.8T. The old 1. I'll keep running and keep on trying no matter what, 8T. Anyway, we got a horribly slipping clutch that we're gonna try to replace here. Missing a bolt. I did notice that this recirculation valve is twisted sideways and disconnected. See, this pipe right here goes up into the intake piping. And you can't do this with, see, this runs off a vacuum. I have to chase this back as well and verify that it's going to a good vacuum source. But recirculation valves are not designed to operate like blow-off valves. Blow-off valves have a set specific spring pressure to where they can pop off and then close. These recirc valves are a little bit more liberal on how they operate because they're supposed to be recirculating the air, and mass airflow sensor cars are not designed to run on blow-off valve type systems anyway. They run best on metered air systems, which is recirculating. So you get the most performance out of it that way anyway. And running a recirc valve like this, you're not really you'll get a whoosh air noise, but it's not gonna be good for you. And you could suck stuff in and so on and so forth. The other thing that I noticed before I get too far is we're missing some PVC pipe up there, some oil tube breather pipe. I'll get to that later. I already shook down the front end. The front end's tight. The bushings aren't horrible for the age. We do have some custom exhaust work. This hanger is doing absolutely nothing. The flex pipe is missing its sheathing. We're down into the clamp section, but as you notice, the clamp is not doing anything. If you pay super close attention, you'll notice that the clamp is doing nothing. And it is welded at the end, so there's that. Welded. You have to go all the way up here to the next clamp connection, and then we have some various other clamp connections, so on and so forth. So this isn't really gonna get out of my way too well, but it is pre-loosened for me, if you can tell. So we'll have to figure something out to make it tighter when we're done as well. Like I said, the mounts aren't horrible. This one could justifiably be changed. CV boots are not leaking. What I would prefer to do to get this transmission out is I would prefer to not take the wheels or axles out. I would prefer to take the axles out right here off the flanges and move the axles to the side, and then get these two transmission brackets out of the way, unbolt the exhaust, get my shift linkage out of the way, and then get my belt housing bolts loose. And the slave cylinder is built inside the transmission on this one. So, if I remember correctly, I'm not gonna do step by step. Oh, it's right up here. We'll, let me remember. Yeah, you can change it externally. Anyway, we'll show you more whenever we pop it out. I'm not doing step by step on this one. So these here are the underbody lights. We got these, you know, colorful lights here. Wrap all the way around the side. That's what these are. Right here. Some underbody lights. Those wires here have been getting in my way and making me frustrated. We have the Porsche-esque transmission out. This beautiful little cute transmission. But unfortunately, it's just front wheel drive. Here we have the throwout bearing. This is your armature device. Your clutch fork is what they typically call them. And the slave cylinder is gonna bolt on right here. I spoke a little bit wrong earlier. The slave cylinder you just pull out with one bolt right here and you can lay it to the side. Now it did have a rod that popped out of it. Where did that go? I will have to find that. Now that I talk about it, I gotta find it. So where did I put it? Anyway, this slave cylinder here, I mean, it still works, but this boot is all broken, and that rod that I'm talking about shouldn't have fallen out because it fell out because this boot is torn. And everything came out the way it should have. I'm gonna find that little rod and we'll get right back. And as soon as I turned the camera off, I looked down and found it. This is the rod that would typically be stuck in your slave cylinder, and it pushes out your throwout bearing. This would traditionally be called a clutch fork, but this is just your pivot assembly for your throwout bearing on your transmission shaft. What would this be called? An input shaft, pinion shaft, transmission input shaft. Someone tell me the exact terms on everything so that we can get the correct information, because now these would be your output flanges for your CV axles. Let's take a look at our new parts and explain how they work real quick. So we already talked about our slave cylinder. This is operated from you have a clutch master cylinder and a clutch slave cylinder. Kind of like you have a brake master cylinder, which is the cylinder up there, and then your slaves would be the pistons and your wheels. Same thing applies to your brake, or I'm sorry, your clutch foot. You've got the piston up there, and then the slave is your piston down here doing the throwout bearing. So this ultimately goes straight through your clutch fork into the throwout bearing, and to disengage the clutch, to push your clutch pedal in, you will push these spring fingers in, and that will take this disc, this big heavy rotating mass of a disc, and it'll push it in and pull it out like this right here. This is what you're activating. Whenever you push the clutch pedal, all these spring fingers right here pop in, and in turn it takes this big heavy disc on your pressure plate and it pushes it in. And then whenever you slip your clutch to go back in gear and shift gears and whatnot, you're see how it's connected right here? You're allowing this piece to go in and out. And then we have a 6-puck clutch disc. This is your clutch disc. We have a clutch and alignment tool and a new throwout bearing. And just a little bit of grease. Just a touch of grease for the splines. And some people say don't grease the splines. Some people say this is only for the pivot ball, just so you know. And you could probably put a little bit up there too, but I think just a little bit of grease on the splines doesn't hurt nothing. Let's go ahead and pop this off so you can take a look. So this getting replaced. Some people get real particular. I've seen some people try to replace this as well, but I've never needed to replace this collar. That's just what that throwout bearing rides on. We also have this needle bearing right here, typically called the pilot bearing, and it goes further in there. We'll take this off next and show you what it looks like with the pressure plate coming off.
Almost feels like there's still bolts in there. It's so stuck, but I know it's on dowels. Like there's a dowel right here. There's a dowel right here. It's almost out. I've done it both hands.
This is what the clutch looked like. Just now pulled it out. I mean, it looks fancy. Either that or it's made out of Swiss cheese. I thought that it said luck. And yeah, that would indicate that it might be original. which isn't unheard of for an original clutch to last an extremely long time. But it's definitely toast. You know, these things can be a little bit deceiving because the first clutch that I did, I think it was the first clutch I did on a 240SX, was laying on the ground, probably was wet, probably was in the mud in my backyard. Anyway, I popped the flywheel off, came straight down and smacked me in the nose and broke it. So this is the dual mass flywheel. It's got some extra absorbent type, you can do your own research on dual mass flywheel, but it's just it's got its own like spring absorbent type material in here that typically wears out and gets loose. Not only that, but I guess you can't really cut them on a lathe and make them true again, and it's got a bunch of hot spots. And I already advised the customer about it's probably a good idea to go to a one-piece flywheel, but they declined and just wanted to do the clutch. So I will be pulling out this pilot bearing, and I'll tap a new pilot bearing in there, and then we'll be throwing it back together. This right here is my pilot bearing puller. It goes like this, and then I load it up in my slide hammer. It's actually extremely tight clearance to get in this pilot bearing, so I had to take this tool to my grinder, and I had to grind some clearance off the backside, and I had to grind some clearance on the hook part. So it's still a little bit hot from clearance grinding. Hot, hot, hot. It's gonna be long enough. I didn't check to see if length was gonna be an issue. We're sticking it in as far as it'll go, and right now me turning it that's supposed to open up the jaws. I could put a pair of pliers here and turn it more. I will do that, and then I'm gonna put the slide hammer in. So I didn't mess around. I just stuck it all the way in, and we went bam, 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 and slide hammered it straight out. Now I just gotta tap the new one in. So you see how that principle worked. That screw in here caused it to cinch up on the backside there. And now that it's so tight, I can't unscrew it with one hand. Now, one thing I noticed is, see how there's a little lip and then the bearings are on the backside? This is directional, and having the video on helped me because I was able to, I didn't necessarily pay so much attention whenever I pulled this bearing off the puller. But now I can see that it goes in like this. And so this would be closest to the engine and this side would be closest to the transmission. So the side with the little ridge is closer to the transmission. So when I put this new bearing in, it's gonna go like this, if that makes sense. So the input shaft will go in this way right here. And this side will be closer with the bearings to the back of the engine. Nice to not put stuff in backwards, isn't it? Now this 14mm quarter drive socket is gonna be perfect. Actually, you know what? I prefer, because I'm gonna have to use an extension, I prefer to use 3/8 drive. So we're gonna go actually, that feels about absolutely perfect, but it might be a little bit too big. If anything, we want it just a hair too small. And you know what? That 15 millimeter is just a hair too small, so that's perfect. We'll put an extension on that, and that's what we'll tap that into place with. Getting the bearing perfectly centered turned out to be a little bit of a challenge. So what I ended up doing was just what I showed you. I centered it up on that cone of this socket, and then I tapped it into place, and I could get a visual on trying to make this extension, this 1/2 inch drive extension, as straight as possible. So I did benefit from inspecting this bearing and noticing that it's a pretty stout bearing, as in the shelf, the casing is pretty thick, and it could withstand some decent wax to put it into place. So there was already some grease on that ball socket. I went ahead and put some fresh grease down here. It's time to, honestly, I'm just gonna wipe this clean. Just sit here. Just gonna wipe it off. I'm not gonna put any grease or anything on it. It's lubricated enough. And then pop this back into place right here. You see, this is just a little bit tricky because that spring just has to gap over. You want to make sure it does it without damaging the spring. I might need both hands. There we go. You hear it clip into place. And then we take, see how it has two flat edges? I was hoping it would actually snap, but you see how I didn't audibly hear it snap into place, but it's clipped into place. You have to index it to where both of those sides slide into this clutch fork. If someone knows the special Audi name for it, if Audi has a special name for it, someone tell me. I'm not really up on all my special jargon and big words like I should be. This particular throwout bearing is the thing I just put on. This particular dual mass flywheel, I already advised, like I said, about replacing it. And I'm not gonna try to fix it. It is what it is. I'm gonna put it together. You know, some people might take their little polishing wheel, and you know what? I'm just not. It's good enough. If it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. I'm gonna already work on extra stuff that I didn't anticipate, trying to find a gasket for this and trying to get the bolts back into place and trying to figure out if I can get the exhaust back up in a better shape and help him out with his PVC situation, which I don't have the part for, so, but we're doing what we can here. Now this clutch disc does have a back and a front, and see how my hand has oil on it? You definitely don't want to get anything on that clutch surface. The good news about the back and the front of the clutch disc is it has to sit flush on your flywheel surface, so it's always common sense. You're not going to put it backwards if there's going to be a big gap right there. So now we're going to put our pressure plate on. I will spray some brake cleaner on this pressure plate surface in case there's any assembly oil on it. cleaned it off. Now you're gonna align it with the studs. There's 3 studs. Those studs are gonna be right there, and right there. This is how I do it. If you got a different way, you can tell me in the comments. Go through around it in a star pattern as many times as possible, and then when I think that everything's sufficiently tightened down in the star pattern, then I just go around the whole thing and make sure none of them go any further. That's just how I do it. Other people can do different ways. That's just how I do it. For the fun of it, I even grabbed my good old torque wrench and put the proper torque spec in. And I checked all the way around. Just for all the YouTube people that love their torque wrenches. You're supposed to hold it with the crankshaft on the other end. Okay. So I didn't feel a need to tidy up the underbody wires any better than I found them, but I did put this extra exhaust clamp on. Check that out. You can't tell me that's not better than what I found it. Oh yeah. I wasn't paid to do exhaust work or any welding, but check it out. I got a exhaust gasket with all 3 bolts through the flange. Can't tell me that isn't better than what I found it. And I got a clamp on the recirc valve, and I spun it around and installed it. Now the only thing I didn't do is the PVC pipe that I found that was busted in there. And I don't have one, so I can't do anything for it anyway. So there she is, all finished up.